Carbon wheels, are they the pinnacle of cycling performance, or just a way to look better at the coffee shop? Now, these are the Superteam S-All EVO 2, a top of the line carbon wheel set.
Does it sound sexy?
They're deep, they're light, but are they actually worth it? I'll also be comparing these wheels to every other wheel set I've tested to see where they stand. For the $1,500 or £1,200 price tag, I could buy a small family wagon and probably have some change left to fill up the tank. Luckily, Superteam sent me this wheel, so it's not beans on toast this month. Thanks Superteam for supporting the channel. Cracking open the box, we are greeted with the Superteam S-All EVO 2 wheels, nicely packaged. No one wants to receive a wheel set that looks like it's just survived an Amazon warehouse brawl. Alongside these wheels, we've got a couple of extras, 2 spare spokes and 2 spare nipples. Then there's the manual, which of course we'll read cover to cover. These wheels come tubeless ready and the valves are already installed, which is a nice touch. Even better that there's no need for tubeless tape because the wheel's construction is fully sealed. These wheels can be set up either tubeless or with an inner tubes. Now, first impressions right out the box, these wheels are making a statement with their high gloss finish. Seriously, I think I can see my surprised face reflecting in them. Now, another small but welcome addition, the cassette spacer for smaller cassettes. These wheels come with a center lock disc mount as well, though if you prefer 6-bolt, that's an option when ordering as well on the website. There are also these little quality check cards for both wheels, front and back. We'll check on some of those details later in the video. These are hooked rims, not hookless. That means a wider range of tire compatibility. One thing that stood out to me immediately, they feel extremely light. Now, we'll weigh them later in the video to see exactly where they land, but initial impressions, they are featherweights. Now, I did give them both a good look over, and visually I couldn't find anything concerning. However, there is this mystery rattle coming from inside the front wheel. We'll dig into that later and see what's going on. Time to take some measurements. For this, I'm using my trusty AliExpress truing stand, which has served me well so far. Very technical, I know. Starting with the rear wheel, the depth is listed at 50 millimeters. Taking 4 measurements around the wheel, though it's not the easiest due to the sort of ripple effect in the carbon, I got 50.6, 49.8, 50.1 and 50 millimeters. That's pretty close to spec with a tiny bit of variation. For the outer width, the spec says 30 millimeters, so I took multiple readings again across different points of the wheel. It is a curved surface, so take it with a pinch of salt. I got 30.1, 30.3, 30.1 and 30.1. Again, all within margin of error. The inner rim width is a claimed 23 millimeters. This is probably the most important measurement because it affects the tire profile. Now, my readings 24.2, 24.4, 24.5 and 24.3. That gives us an average of 24.35, which is actually more than the claimed 23 millimeter listed on the side. Now onto the front wheel, which should have the same measurements as the rear. For depth, again listed at 50 mil, and my measurements came out at 49.6, 50, 50.1 and 50.2. For the outer width, we're expecting 30 millimeters and I measured 30.1, 30.3, 30.1 and 30.2. Lastly, that inner width again, which is the important one, and it should be 23. I got 23.9, 23.9, 23.9 and 24.1 millimeters. So this is more along the lines of that 24 millimeters, which is what we got from the rear wheel as well. Inner rim width actually being 1 millimeter wider than advertised. These wheels use carbon fiber bladed spokes, meaning they're not round, but instead have a flatter profile, supposedly to improve aerodynamics. Now, with the spare spoke in hand, you can actually see that there is a fair amount of flex. Now, of course, this isn't the direction that they're designed to be strong in, but it's interesting nonetheless. The spoke thickness is claimed at 4 mil, so let's give it a check. I took some measurements and most of them were around 3.9 millimeters or the 4 millimeters, meaning they match up with the website specs. Each spoke comes in at around 3 grams, which I was very surprised at. That is incredibly light. Now, the front wheel has 10 spokes on the drive side and 10 spokes on the non-drive side, so 20 in total. Counting up at the rear, we have 12 spokes either side, so 24 spokes in total. Now, both of these wheels use a 2-cross pattern, meaning each spoke crosses another spoke in 2 places before reaching the rim. Now, on these wheels, I was actually able to fit a 3mm spacer between the spokes at the crossover points, which is one of the largest gaps I've seen. Now, some argue that spokes not touching is better because it prevents creaking and noises, while others say touching adds strength by distributing the forces more evenly. Now we can check the spoke tension, and for that I'm using my trusty AliExpress digital spoke tension meter. It's actually a really useful little gadget. Now, starting with the front wheel, I measured each spoke and then fed the numbers into the Park Tool spoke tension app, which checks for any irregularities. At 20% variance, we got all green ticks, meaning that everything is within spec. Dropping it down to 5% variance, we still had the green tick across the board. Now, moving on to the rear wheel, we followed the same process, measuring each spoke and checking the variance. Again, we got the green light, both at 20% and 5% variance, confirming that these wheels are properly tensioned. Now for the Truness checks. Before we get into this, let me just say, I'm not a professional wheel builder. I'm still evolving. First things first, we are going to check how round the wheel is. This is also known as the radial Truness. Now, there are two ways to check this: the sound test and the dial indicator test. Starting with the rear wheel, the simple sound test. Spin the wheel in the truing stand and listen. Now, if the wheel is perfectly round, it will make constant contact. But if it touches and move away, creating a rhythmic sort of vroom, vroom, vroom sound, for want of a more technical term, then there is more deviation. Now, on this wheel, there was only minor sound, but you can still see the deviation slightly, and you can see it with the naked eye. For a more accurate measurement, I use a dial indicator. Now, to do this, I found the lowest point on the wheel. I then zeroed the dial indicator and then spun the wheel to check the maximum deflection. Now, since the entire dial represents 1mm, each mark on this dial indicator is 0.01 millimeters. The final reading was 0.36 millimeters of deflection. Next, we're checking that lateral Truness, which is basically that side to side movement, the kind of wobble that makes a wheel look like it's doing the Macarena when it spins. As a kid, I experienced this many times. The wobble, that is, not the Macarena.
You guys know the Macarena, right?
Just like before, I started with the sound checks. Spinning the wheel, I could hear a slight variation in tone, and with the dial indicator, the maximum deflection was 0.24 millimeters, which is pretty damn good. Let's look at the front radial Truness, so the roundness. With the sound test, I spun the wheel and listened for any rubbing against a metal gauge. Just like the rear wheel, there was only a very minor deviation. After some careful adjustments with the dial indicator, the reading came out at 0.31 millimeters of deviation. Now let's check that side to side movement, or the lateral Truness. Now, spinning the wheel and using the sound test, I could hear only the slightest variation. Now, if I really zoomed in and looked super close, you can just about see some deviation, some movement. Now, for the dial indicator test, I measured the maximum lateral deviation, which came out at 0.17 millimeters, which is pretty damn low and pretty impressive. Now, if we take all of the deviations from both the radial and the lateral checks and create an average across all four measurements, we get 0.27 millimeters. These wheels come with DT Swiss hubs, which is always a good sign. And yes, in the stand, the thing just spins and spins and spins. Honestly, it is pretty impressive. I guess that's the magic of ceramic bearings, super low friction, almost effortless rolling. Spinning the wheel in your hand, you would feel any grinding in the bearings, but for me, there was no roughness, just pure satisfaction. However, earlier in the video, I noticed a sound coming from the inside of the front wheel, and I can still hear that now. Now, when spinning fast, it's barely noticeable, but at slow speeds, there's definitely a little rattle. To be honest, I'm not too sure what this could be, and if you'll hear it when riding, but when shoved against a camera super close to the microphone, it's noticeable. Moving on to the rear wheel, the bearings feel just as smooth, and since these are DT Swiss hubs with ceramic bearings, that's exactly what I'd expect. No grinding, no vibrations, just clean, frictionless movement. Now, if you want the full specs of these wheels or any other Superteam wheels, I've got them all listed on my website with every detail you could possibly need. You can also compare them side by side as well. Now, I'll leave a link down below for you to check out. The important thing, the weight. How heavy or how light are these? So, the front weighs 645 grams, and the rear comes in at 745 grams, giving us a total combined weight of 1,390 grams. That is seriously light for a wheel set that are 50mm deep. Do subscribe to see how these wheels after a few thousand miles in a later video. I have various other wheelset reviews, including this one, which is a test of a similar wheelset. I shall see you there.